So, hi there. So, welcome to this next edition of the Joel Blake Business Show here on bbtv.live. I'm your host, Joel Blake, and I'm here to talk about big business. Now, today's episode is going to be fantastic in many, many different ways because we've got a fantastic panel of experts, leaders in their own right. And so, let's get to it. And I firstly want to introduce Anne-Marie Hunt. So, Anne is the head of corporate banking for West Midlands at the NatWest Group. We have Tim Davis. He's the regional head of primary markets for the London Stock Exchange Group. And last but certainly not least, we have Chris Romans, partner for the EY practice and Midlands tax and law lead for EY. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. How are you all?
Very well. That's good.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, big business, it's a big subject at the moment. There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the economy. There's a lot going on regionally. And we all know that access to finance is a genuine challenge for businesses who are in this ambitious and growth phase of their organisation, no matter of the size. But today we really want to talk about high growth businesses and those with that high growth potential. And so what we really want to explore today is, what are financial organisations looking for when they're looking to support businesses? What do organisations themselves need to do to innovate? And how do we ensure that there's fair financial inclusion for all? And those are the things we really want to talk about today, because one thing's about talking about the issues and the problems that we all know we're all facing as the UK PLC at large. But ultimately, the businesses that we all support are the ones that are really going to drive growth. So I'd like to come to yourself first, Anne-Marie, with a bit of an opening question, really, in that, given the economic impact, what do you look for as an organisation when you're looking to prepare and support a business to leverage finance for growth?
And I think it's very challenging for businesses at the moment. We all know that. So the so-called mini budget, I think, has sent a lot of shockwaves. But there's a lot of support for growing entrepreneurial businesses. And I think those businesses will continue to thrive. So I would encourage those people to be dynamic in their thinking and don't just resource traditional sources of lending. Think about looking at different options, speak to different people, and just also think about chemistry. Who's the right person for you? So you're not just looking for somebody to lend you money, you're looking for a partner and somebody who can support you and work with you and be a part of your business. I think that's more about the entrepreneur rather than what the bank is looking for, because they're the important people, in my opinion. So look beyond traditional banks. So I'm a non-executive director on the LEP board, and I would encourage people to think about organisations such as the LEP, networking opportunities, advice, support that they can give you. So one of the problems I think high growth businesses find is that they have the potential, they want to scale up, but quite often they're not surrounded by the right people, and therefore they don't reach their true potential.
And that's a really good point, Anne-Marie, because I think often we forget that entrepreneurs have the responsibility for their own success, ultimately. Yet, and as an entrepreneur myself, you get so caught into what you're trying to do to achieve. You sometimes forget that it's not about doing it by yourself. You do need that support. And I think, Chris, in terms of what EY have been doing for many years in the region, it would be good to kind of get an idea of what you're seeing some of those regional challenges for those ambitious organisations like Anne-Marie has described, who want to get on, who want to succeed, but might not feel they can get the support that they need. So what are the challenges that you see?
Yeah, I suppose the challenges are many. I think, as Anne-Marie's already said, the kind of the things that are out there at the moment in the economic world. We've had COVID, we've had a war, we've had high inflation, we've got increasing interest rates. So we're seeing a whole lot of things that a lot of entrepreneurs just haven't seen before. Those ones. We had a really good talk the other week by Sir Peter Rigby, who's lived through recessions, etc., and has got that experience. But a lot of new entrepreneurs haven't necessarily got that experience. And one of the key things that we like to do as Entrepreneur of the Year programme is help those newer entrepreneurs with advice from more experienced entrepreneurs and putting the people together to help them go through some of those trickier times. Because the uncertainty that's out there is really difficult to predict what it's going to be and what the impact on the business is, and planning for those uncertain moments coming through. Anne-Marie, again, it was already mentioned the recent mini budget, which didn't necessarily help with that kind of certainty in the markets or anything. So there's been a bit of a U-turn, which has helped. But key to businesses, my specialist subject is tax, and key to businesses on that side is certainty of tax. So what tax will they be paying if they make an investment decision now, which may involve 2, 3, 5-year plan? What will their outcome be from a tax point of view is key to that. The other area, I suppose, is talent. Key element is attracting the talent, and I think we are blessed in Birmingham of having a very young, diverse population, a very highly skilled number of great universities on our patch. And the key is kind of nurturing that talent into and keeping them in the region, not getting them pulled into London or elsewhere.
Which again is a great point, and I will come back to that tax issue because obviously it is a burning issue for all of us at this time. But I'm sure there might be a positive way in which businesses can start looking at tax, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But Tim, I'd like to come to yourself because Chris just alluded to this kind of regional support.
Yeah.
But the London Stock Exchange Group, they're seeing this at a whole different level to a degree. And so what are you seeing in a similar way in terms of some of those challenges for businesses?
Okay.
And I guess what part is the London Stock Exchange Group playing in trying to help businesses at that level?
So first and foremost, I think we should address the reality, which is that we know where the economy is at the moment. We know that the performance and the attitude, if you like, of the stock market broadly reflects that. So at the moment, the market is quite listless. In common with venture capital and private equity, we're also seeing investors who may well be sitting on significant amounts of cash, but there are also a lot of them sitting on their hands. And that's because they're waiting to see how things turn. Now, I've worked in and around the stock market for the best part of 30 years, and I can tell you that it will come back. It's a question of when. But I think the first thing we need is a more settled UK economic environment and also more joined up policy and thinking. I think as and when that returns and as and when the promised numbers start coming through, then investors will also start to relax a little. I think the second thing is that this point about there being a lot of capital out there, there is. And there are ever-growing nooks and crannies of new types of capital available for the right companies. And I say the right companies because the flip side of the current situation is that, yes, there's a lot of cash, but investors who may be minded to do things, it's a buyer's market. So it's very difficult for companies too. But I think I look across all of the private companies that I talk to, and some I've known over many years from when they were private and now public, where there is a will, there is a way. And what investors want over and over again is give me or show me the smart, able, ambitious people with businesses that require growth capital, and hopefully, well, 9 times out of 10, they'll find a way of getting it.
You say that, Tim, and I do get that, but I also think that there's a challenge to a degree for the organisations to understand maybe some of the journeys of some of those business owners too.
And to address your other point about what are we doing to help, I think first and foremost is that we have a team that covers the UK, which I'm just one part, so I cover Wales, Midlands, East Anglia, and have various other responsibilities as well. My job is to be available for companies that are anything from the mildly curious about, can you explain to me this whole IPO thing? How does it work? What's an IPO? Because a long time ago, I spent some time raising money for private companies, and the number of, just about every business plan that came in, it was trade sale or IPO in 3 years. You ask the question, do you know what an IPO is? And they sort of, no. So
would you say there's an education
Oh, absolutely.
issue
Huge. No, it's huge
for
education
businesses?
opportunity for us, because the thing about the UK, and using non-technical terms, we are a great nation or a great archipelago of entrepreneurs and starter-uppers of businesses. And the reality is that whichever way you look at it, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of healthcare, potentially very high growth businesses. So it's incumbent on not just me, but also colleagues around the table and other industries to identify and engage with as many of these businesses as possible. Partly the education piece, but partly also finding the good businesses, and in my case, finding the ones who are more than mildly curious about the IPO option.
So, going back to what you said earlier, Chris, around kind of the work of EY and the entrepreneur program in particular, and that kind of peer-to-peer type of structure that you put in. Have you seen the transferring of education working well in terms of entrepreneurs understanding what they can do to grow?
Yeah, it's certainly the feedback we get from the entrepreneurs who kind of take part in the program. There's an award, and it's great that somebody wins a nice shiny thing to put on their mantelpiece. But actually, they come into it as part of the community. The community piece of it, and the learning piece, is really where they get the most from it. we run a retreat for all our effectively finalists from across the UK. We get them together in a nice country park, and so we had, I think, about 80 of them together for a retreat for a whole day of various kind of talks and presentations. And one of them we did have on finance, and it was a really interesting one. We had a panel of entrepreneurs who've been through that journey of private to PE and through to IPO, and somebody from a private equity house, and they actually talked about the journey and the pros and cons through, and that education piece, because people don't really understand, and it's really important to hear it from somebody who's been through that journey.
But then isn't that biased in some regard? Because what you've got then is a peer group of entrepreneurs who are like-minded. How do entrepreneurs who want to be part of that link in? You know, how do they become part of that set, so to speak? Because they might not have the experience, they might not have the network, they might have the opportunity.
It's a combination of we collectively find them, or they find us, or we're introduced them by third parties. I think a really, really important point to make is that, you know, IPO is often cited as the goal for a lot of businesses, regardless of how much they actually understand about it. IPO is not a commodity product. It's for the few, not the many. You know, you use whatever cliche you like. Increasingly, it's right for a smaller number of businesses, but the numbers that come to market, certainly in the UK, are, broadly speaking, better businesses, more developed businesses, even if they are actually relatively early stage and relatively lowly valued. And the better, what makes them stand out again is the people, the plan, their whole approach to business and finance and so on and so forth.
But then you must see this at various levels, Anne-Marie, in terms of the acceleration programme that NatWest Group provide. I believe it's 14 hubs now across the UK, which are incubating and providing support for businesses. And I guess from many, you know, those who just have an idea to some of the businesses that maybe Chris and Tim have described in terms of more established, more ambitious businesses. But what are some of are there any findings or any kind of statistics that you might have around the type of support you provide there? Because I think it'd be good for maybe our audience to have an understanding of what that looks like.
So first of all, I think your point about growth and where an entrepreneur sits is really important. So I'd read our Springboard to Recovery report, and I was quite surprised that 15% of corporates were mid-size or SME only 5 years ago. So those people, I guess, will find that most of their promise is unrealised because they won't be surrounding themselves with the right people. So I feel we have a responsibility to find those people and make sure they're in the right place and looked after in the right way. But the accelerator hubs, I think, are really important. So there's one in the West Midlands, of course, and they've supported 3,500 businesses in very recent times, 198 million in total investments. So I think it's about journey end to end. So recognising and supporting those people at the start of their journey, but then moving them through, and then possibly to my team with the bespoke support to then manage them to the other side of the relationship.
Okay, well, I mean that's a fantastic example of support, and obviously you talked about your work, Chris, and talked about the work yourself, Tim. I think one of the things that we often understand within the region is the fact that we've got our level of diversity in all shapes and forms of the word. And that itself creates a real innovative opportunity to showcase how our region can help be more competitive, help businesses to be more competitive here and abroad. But how do we ensure financial inclusion within that? Because many of the businesses that we have, whether it's from local communities right through to large organisations, there's a level of diversity within all that whole of that chain that requires different levels of support. And I know you mentioned some of the work that you're doing, Tim. I know you talked about the LEP as well, Anne-Marie, but one of the things I've seen as a challenge in my own career in the region has been the fact that many of the business support organisations don't have enough understanding of the needs of all the different diverse groups, and I mean that right across the board. Then on top of that, you've got the challenge of intersectionality within those groups. So it might be a female business owner from an ethnic minority group who might have a disability, who might identify herself as lesbian or gay in that regard. So there's different complex needs that are not always looked at from the organisations that they're trying to get business support from. How do you feel organisations can start to open up themselves to increase the level of understanding to ensure, A, financial inclusion works better in the region, but two, it enables to unleash this potential that we have through our diversity in the region. How do you feel we could start to do some of that?
It is a problem. So I'd listened to a presentation recently, and something that is quite sad to hear, that there's such a large proportion of entrepreneurs who account for a huge percentage of entrepreneurs, but actually they're the least likely to come forward and seek support.
Yeah, that's
Quite private, quite self-sufficient, and then are they truly fulfilling their potential? And that's quite disappointing to think that those people aren't achieving their potential. But for me, I think that the challenge starts with us. I think that's something we need to work on. We need to make sure that our people are challenging and helping people, that we've got the right people in the right seats, that they know how to speak to a range of people, range of sectors. So I think education for companies such as us, such as ours, is really important.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, London Stock Exchange Group is a FTSE 100 company in its own right, and we are, I won't say a trailblazer, but as an organisation, we are totally transparent, and we are very, very hot on all the acronyms: ESG, environmental, societal and governmental, and also diversity and inclusion. But it's not just because we want to be a diligent and good employer and trendsetter. It's because a lot of the institutions in the broad sense that we deal with, and that's everything from regulators through to the retail banks, you name it, we deal with them. But also from the point of view of the stock market that we're talking about today, is that the institutional investors who support that market, and bearing in mind the capital pool is around £5.2 trillion, so it's a lot of investors and a lot of money. Increasingly, they too are very, very keen on understanding what existing listed and companies coming to the market by way of IPO, what their policies are on ESG, D&I, and so on and so forth. Specifically, not making sure that when it comes to the environment, it's not the so-called greenwashing. It's not, you've got a statement, prove to me you're actually enacting it.
I want to see
and
numbers,
how
I
it
want to see
works.
stats, I want to see evidence, I want to see
Exactly.
impact.
So I think that's very, very important. But your point specifically, Joel, about financial inclusion, again, it's not just us. We're in the vanguard of it, but also the Financial Conduct Authority is in a sense leading the charge in parallel with the British government. All have made plain that we live in an age where inclusion of the retail investor within the wider stock market, if you like, and the ability for private investors, retail investors, to buy shares on the same terms as the institutional investors who typically support the IPOs. There's been wholesale change there in the last couple of years. And again, we're in the vanguard of that, and to help us on our way, we bought, in fact, we've done 2 rounds of financing with them, with a fintech called Primary Bid. And essentially it's an app, and if you're signed up with them, you can press a button on your phone and you can buy shares in an offer. That simple.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that is a huge, huge step forward. And similarly, one of the responsibilities of companies when they list or are already listed is to make sure that they are treating, absolutely primary responsibility, to make sure they are treating all shareholders and all employees equally.
Do you see that mindset, Chris, as well in the work that you're doing with high growth entrepreneurs in terms of that kind of innovative approaches to tackling financial inclusion?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I kind of think, entrepreneurs, their business is almost is a bit of them, and so therefore, most entrepreneurs, it's the family of the people who work for them, and they really want to do what's right for their people and society and the local economy. So that's really important. But just picking up on one of your points, and what you mentioned, fulfilling people's potential, it's absolutely key, and that's the key drive that I always think about. Making sure people have got that access to fulfil their potential. And I think one of the key things I think we don't do well enough as a country is celebrate entrepreneurs and the great that they do. Our country, we almost knock them. They almost, they're to be knocked because they're rich.
Absolutely. If you fail, it's almost like a black mark against you as an organisation.
Rather than what they do is ultimately, if it wasn't for entrepreneurs, people wouldn't have jobs, we wouldn't have wealth. They are the wealth creators, and we should be, celebrating the great that they do. And we have such great role models. You are one of the great role models locally, Joel. It's always make you blush. Someone like Ben Francis. Again, kids see that story of delivering pizzas part-time when trying to build a business and where he's gone to now.
Amazing.
That's what you want people to aspire to say, yeah, I can do that.
But I think you make a really great point because, you know, especially with Ben and I guess the current generation of entrepreneurs who arguably have almost thrown the rule book away and said, we're doing this in our own way, in our own terms. And they're bringing that mindset into the types of innovations they're bringing into their ideas and seeing that manifest. In, you know, Gymshark, perfect example of that. But where does the future go for the organisations who are going to be having to support these types of young people, younger entrepreneurs, and indeed older entrepreneurs who are adopting some of the new, I guess, more modern ways of doing business, being more digitally enabled in order to grow their business? How do we help the organisations themselves catch up? I mean, I know you've given some great examples of that, but I think as time goes on, it's only going to get faster. The innovation's only going to become a lot more scalable. It's going to become quicker. There's going to be more diverse founders trying to bring more diverse ideas. Do we really think the UK is prepared to catch up?
Well, I think we need to be. So there was something I jotted down that I wanted to highlight. So nationally, whilst only 1% of companies considered high growth, considered high growth, they employ 10% of the workforce and generate 25% of the turnover.
Wow.
So it really makes you think. And we have a high growth part of the bank that's very specific, and that's all about having making sure we've identified the businesses, leading them through, having them in the right place, and then surrounding them with the right sort of products and help. And I think that's essential, because I think you make a really valid point. We can't just do what we've always done and expect that to be fit for purpose, because it won't be.
And I ask a question because partly when I talk to counterparts abroad and they're talking about innovation and the pace of change, UK is doing great, but we can do so much better because we already have the tools at our disposal. You know, we do have an entrepreneurial culture, but sometimes often restricted because of the culture that we place upon that culture, i.e. if you fail, you're not as good. Go to the US, how many times have you failed? What have you learned? How have you implemented that learning?
But also I think you've got to be balanced about it, because I mean I see things through a public company lens, and I look at how the valuations on NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are sort of, you know, compared to the real world valuations that exist on our markets in London. They are, shall we say, fanciful. And I feel for the finance director who has to deliver those numbers. I really do. But what we, on a serious note, what we've seen more recently with the complete fall off or falling away of the risk capital that was plentiful up until about 6-9 months ago in the US, we've seen the valuations of businesses which floated last year in the US absolutely tank.
Okay.
Here, yes, some are down, but actually by nowhere near as much.
Okay, so are you saying that we're in a better position?
We are
generally?
in the real world valuation
In the real world
territory.
valuation terms.
Yeah. And investors, certainly again in the public markets, how I see life, investors who support the public market will pay, at the outset, they'll pay a fair price for a good proposition. And then the other mindset with the UK institutional investor, particularly with the growth companies on our AIM market, is that they come into a lot of those businesses with a full expectation of following their money, so supporting successive fundraisers for acquisitions or working capital to expand the base, whatever it is. And I was actually looking, it's an interesting point this, I was looking at, again, our AIM market, which started life in 1995, 4,000 odd companies been through it, 850 on there at the moment. 48 billion has been raised at IPO and a further 84 by way of follow-ons post-IPO. And in the UK, it's 65% of the companies. Sorry, 65% of the companies are UK. So you think of that capital being, if you like, drip-fed into the national economy. It's enormous.
It's a good point. And Anne-Marie's already mentioned it. The different sources of the capital that are out there now, and you kind of think, 20 or 30 years ago, without technology in the world as it is, it was really hard to raise capital. You kind of needed wealth to build a business, your own personal wealth. Now, with technology, you can can build a business in your bedroom to start with. But the access to different sorts of finance, but also the entrepreneurial finance, we're seeing more and more of the entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial families having funds to invest in new entrepreneurs. So if you take some of the local families, the Richardsons, the Rigbys, the Samworth, they've all got funds that they are reinvesting in younger entrepreneurs, new businesses. And also a lot of the entrepreneurs who are exiting their businesses are exiting them so much younger because they built them up and sold them by the time they're 30. And what they're going to do for the rest of their life, they want to, they love business and they
One
want
day.
to, naturally, you know, it's almost a virtuous circle. They want to go and help the next business,
Absolutely.
invest in the next business, and they bring the expertise, the experience and the finance.
Yeah.
You know, it's really good and healthy, this virtuous
That's a
circle
really
of
good point,
entrepreneurs.
actually. We don't often talk about that network effect, do we, of the kind of giving back and I guess the contribution socially and economically that entrepreneurs make when they've got to that point of success, whatever
Yeah.
success looks like to them. But just going back to the kind of tax point from earlier as well, because the contributions that entrepreneurs make, obviously in terms of tax is a huge contribution too. But the tax burden on the economy and the tax burden on businesses is one that, would you say, is going to be even more challenging as time goes on? Or do you think from a business point of view, using tax could be done in a much more effective way?
It's interesting because off the back of the mini budget, there was a whole kind of market panic about the government finances. But in 21-22, tax was at the highest percentage of GDP than it's been for a long, long time. It was at 30%. Total tax revenue is about 700 billion pounds. So. And also, there's fiscal drag because all the thresholds are being frozen and there's inflation. So actually, the tax take hasn't gone down that much. So, you know, I do think we've got to be very careful about over-taxing our entrepreneurs and our companies. We want people to invest. We want the economy to grow. And you've got to focus the tax incentives in the right way. And I think the kind of innovation zones that they're talking about, where effectively there will be lower tax rates in certain zones around the country. I think 38 authorities have already applied for this, including the West Midlands Combined Authority, where you'll have a zone where you will have no business rates. There will be no SDLT on purchasing property to develop either to residential or commercial, relaxed planning rules, lower NIC rates, employers' rates up to £50,000. So those kind of focus that investment into a region and area is great because it helps with levelling up. It also potentially brings that kind of conglomeration effect where you bring businesses together in a place and they just bounce off each other. It's how the Industrial Revolution started in the first place. Bringing great people and people together, and it's a virtuous circle.
Well, it strikes me that we're in a time where another revolution is. I hold my thought actually. It's not yet taking place, but it's about to, in relation to the way in which the next wave of digital technologies, the next wave of innovation is going to affect all markets, all sectors, all types of businesses. And I guess it's the innovators who are prepared for that are the ones who are going to be the winners. But also, and more importantly, should also leave the door open for the next generation to follow them. Because they're going to come with another revolution and so forth. And I think Birmingham and the Midlands region has an opportunity to set that standard and set that blueprint. As you said, the Industrial Revolution, without us, look what's happened in the world, and we kick-started that. So what's the next wave of kickstart for us? And I think from what I've heard today and from your all expertises and your experiences, the opportunity is here, but there's education on both sides of the fence that's needed in order to recognise those opportunities, to realise the value of those opportunities, and then to create the legacies that we all want to leave through the work that we all do. And I just think for the audiences that I've heard today, I'm sure you've heard a real stimulating conversation that's really got giving you food for thought. And if it hasn't, you need to kind of think about what you've heard today and start thinking about it in that way, because the reality is that change is only going to come from the entrepreneurs who are willing to take the risk, but also the organisations who are working with those entrepreneurs who are willing to take risks too. And it's the collaborative effect of that that's going to create change. And so what I'd like to ask you all is just think about a final thought, really, that you could just share with our viewers based on your view on big finance. And so the question very simply for me is, what does big finance mean to you, is the question. But also final thought.
So final thought, there's no sales pitch. I think I almost think this is separate to who I work for, and that it's NatWest. For me, it's surround yourself with the right people. Think more broadly about what help you need. Seek help out there. There's a lot of people who just want to help. And also think about chemistry. Think about who you connect with. Surround yourself with the right people. And I just think that we're just evolving so quickly. If I think back 20 years to the way that I did this job or a similar job. It's just changed completely. So I think it's a lot more dynamic. We're thinking about some of these things we've talked about today. We're trying to help people in different ways. We're forward-looking, and I think there's lots more ways that entrepreneurs can be supported in lots of different ways. So just be curious, seek help, network, and that would be my plea really. So as I say, that's not a NatWest pitch. That's a personal view. But if you do want some general help, you can search on NatWest Accelerator, and you can search on NatWest High Growth Businesses. And I think there's some useful, helpful information on there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Tim.
I'm having to rethink what I was going to say because Anne-Marie used the exact word. Be curious. No, but be curious definitely applies, and that's at all levels and all stages of development for entrepreneurs and also for businesses. I think I think we've all touched on this point about different pools of capital for different types of businesses, different stages of development, and so on. There is money out there. So be curious from the entrepreneur perspective. Ask lots of questions and don't be afraid to knock on people's doors. From the professional world, there is an enormous amount of support which is available for nothing. And when I talk about support, informal advice, explanations as to how things work, where they may look, and so on and so forth. You know, we've all come up through our careers. We've all dealt with companies at very early stages, and I think it's a very important part. A couple of things just to share with you, if I may, about London Stock Exchange. One is that we have a mantra internally, which is that we want businesses to start here, grow here, and stay here. And when we talk about here, we mean UK. And part and parcel of our own evolution, and also what does our business look like for the next generation, it's in the public domain. We are in the process of launching a market for private company capital raising as well. So taking our, he says, acknowledged skills in running public markets, but applying it to private companies. So companies seeking capital on one side, funders on the other, if you like, equity funders. And that is, it's under development at the moment, and hopefully will be launched over the next 6-9 months.
You should watch this space then. Sounds really good.
I'll come back and tell you about it.
And last but again, certainly not least, Chris, what's your kind of final thought around big finance for you?
Yeah, I've talked about it before. I think we are in a current golden age for kind of entrepreneurs and growing businesses. It is tough at the moment. We're in this point in the economic cycle where it's tough, but with the different sources of finance there are, the ability to scale a business so quickly through technology on a global basis. There's huge opportunities for people to grow businesses, but I think it comes back to your point, is that financial inclusion and making sure we spot every single great entrepreneur there is in the UK and help them build that business so that they can fulfill that opportunity and grow it in the UK, to create wealth in the UK, to create jobs in the UK, and not to miss that great idea, or for that idea to be bought by a US company and taken somewhere else.
Fantastic. Well, look, always great to end on an optimistic point, and so thank you all for your time this afternoon. And for all those who watched today's episode, thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you soon.